Krishna Sharanam Sharane, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam Sharane, Kripani Kevalam, Kripani Kevalam, Kripani Kevalam Sharane, Prabhu Kripani Kevalam, Kripani Kevalam, Kripani Kevalam Sharane, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam Sharane, Sharanagatoham, Sharanagatoham, Sharanagatoham Sharane, Sharanagatoham, Sharanagatoham, Sharanagatoham Sharane, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam Sharane, Namo Shri Gurave, Namo Shri Gurave, Namo Shri Gurave, Namo Namo, Namo Shri Gurave, Namo Shri Gurave, Namo Shri Gurave, Namo Namo, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam Sharane, Ram Krishna Jaya Jaya Ram Krishna, 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 Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam Sharane, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam Sharane.
Om Ardram Jwalati Jyotirahmasmi, Jyotir Jwalati Brahmahamasmi, Yohamasmi Brahmahamasmi, Ahamasmi Brahmahamasmi, Ahamevaham Mam Juhomi Swaha. Melting into the light, I am the light that shines. The light shines, the light which is Brahman. That which I am is nothing but Brahman. I exist, and I exist as Brahman. I myself offer myself into the infinite light, which is myself. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning the topic is Raja Yoga, the royal path. And so of course the title explains itself. Raja meaning king or kingly or royal, and so the Raja Yoga is the yoga of the royal yoga or the yoga of kings. And the name Raja Yoga actually comes not from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras or the Yoga Darshana, the philosophical tradition coming out of the Yoga Sutras. It comes from the Tantra, the Tantric tradition, where there are many different yogas spoken of. There's Kundalini Yoga, Laya Yoga, Mantra Yoga, Hatha Yoga can be considered a part of the Tantric tradition, and various other yogas. And among them is Raja Yoga. And Raja Yoga in Tantra means the path of meditation. So why is that called the royal path? It's because in the path of Raja Yoga, you use the mind to control the mind. You don't have any external instruments. And Bhakti Yoga, you have rituals and your puja and your maintenance of the shrine and bhajans and musical instruments and offering of flowers and so many things. In Karma Yoga, you have the field of action. Jnana Yoga is also purely internal, but Raja Yoga is called the royal path because no external instrumentality is used. It's the mind controlling the mind. So in Raja Yoga, the difficulty of Raja Yoga comes from the fact that you have no external instrumentality. In Bhakti Yoga, there are many things that you can do. You can engage yourself. In Karma Yoga, you can engage yourself in various things and work with the mind as you're engaging yourself. When you do puja, whether it's a simple puja at home where you just put some flowers on the altar and offer some incense and maybe a plate of sweets or fruits or something, then it's easy to focus the mind because we're used to being active. And so here we're making offerings, but the offering is directed towards God. And so it keeps the mind focused on God. But we're not just sitting there like this and trying to control the mind with the mind. We're using action. And if you do a more elaborate puja, then you're using mudras and so many things, mudras and mantras and offerings, etc. But in Raja Yoga, you control the mind by the mind. So how do you do that? We're used to controlling other things with a tool, with an instrument. There's some instrumentality for other actions. But in Raja Yoga, it's the mind itself which controls itself. That, of course, only is possible because one part of the mind controls another part of the mind. Unless the mind has parts, how can it control itself? If it's a unitary thing, if the mind is unitary, just one single unitary thing, how is it going to control itself? It's just one thing. It is itself. But it's because the mind has parts, that one part of the mind can take control of another part of the mind. And so it's called the royal path because it's the path where you don't need anything else. You have everything that you need if you have a mind. You have everything that you need. So it's, in fact, in Indian civilization itself, you find, as Swamiji said once, he said that in India you find the development of maximum creativity with minimum input. Like you said, for instance, in Indian cooking, nowadays, of course, you have access to refrigerators and stoves and multiple burner stoves and so many things. But even when I first lived in India, most people still had just a simple either coal or wood single burner, just a single hole in a brick and mud-made oven, and cooking multi-dish meals all on that one fire. Everything from that one fire, making everything there. And so Swamiji said that India had excelled at the maximum creativity with the minimum of instruments. And so with Hatha Yoga also. And so the West has excelled in machinery, has excelled in making instruments and machinery and tools and everything, and those certainly have their place. But in Hatha, if you go to exercise in a Western gym, we have all sorts of instruments and all sorts of machines, and a different machine for every part of the body, and every machine for every different muscular system. But in Hatha Yoga, you have nothing. You have your body and you have the floor. So you use your own body and the natural resistance in order to exercise. And so in Raja Yoga, that was the extreme of that, or that is the extreme of that, with regard to spiritual practice, where you control the mind with the mind. No other tool is necessary, no other instrument is necessary, no ritual is necessary. The mind controlling the mind. And so therefore, Raja Yoga. Now Swami Vivekananda, he applied the term Raja Yoga to or he combined, I should say, he didn't apply it to, he combined the idea of Raja Yoga from the Tantra with Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. The Patanjala Yoga, it's usually called Patanjala Yoga, or Yoga Darshanam. As you know, there were 6 traditional schools of philosophy in India. There are actually more schools of philosophy than that. The 6 schools of Indian philosophy doesn't include Kashmir Shaivism and the Tantric philosophy. Though Tantra and Kashmir Shaivism can certainly be included within Vedanta, that's no problem from a Vedantic standpoint. But it's usually considered that there were these 6 main schools of orthodox Hindu philosophy. Buddhist philosophy was other, and Jaina philosophy was other. And so there was the Nyaya and Vaisheshika, and then Sankhya and Yoga, and then the Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. That is Purva Mimamsa meaning what we call the Mimamsakas, and Uttara Mimamsa meaning the Vedantins. And so yoga was a separate school of philosophy, traditionally in India. So the Yoga Darshana comes to different conclusions from the Vedanta. For instance, in Yoga Darshana, as in Sankhya philosophy, there's the idea that there are many different Purushas. Each living being has a Purusha, including human beings, animals, and plants, insects. Every living organism has a different Purusha. It doesn't accept the Vedantic conclusion that there's one Paramatma, one Supreme Self. There are other differences between Yoga philosophy and Vedanta philosophy. But that was another feature of the genius of Hinduism, that it was assimilative. It had the ability to assimilate and to absorb ideas. And so you find that over time, Yoga and Sankhya were absorbed into the Vedanta. Nyaya, logic, was absorbed into Vedanta. Many ideas of the Purva Mimamsakas were absorbed into Vedanta. For instance, it's only the Mimamsakas and Vedanta which accept 6 methods of knowledge, that is 6 pramanas, 6 methods of valid knowledge. Other schools accept less. That Vedanta absorbed from the Purva Mimamsakas. And so Vedanta in particular, Indian civilization in general, and Vedanta in particular, had this tremendous power to absorb. And so Yoga Darshana, which was a separate and competing system of philosophy, where they argued against Vedanta and Vedanta argued against them. But Vedanta absorbed the truths of the yoga system. And so you find in books like Aparokshanubhuti, attributed to Shankaracharya, but probably not actually by Shankaracharya, it's probably a later book. But there you find that it gives a Vedantic interpretation of the 8 limbs of yoga. And so Swami Vivekananda continued that tradition in several ways. And one of the ways was to combine the idea of Raja Yoga from the Tantras with the idea of Patanjala Yoga from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and to call the whole thing Raja Yoga. So Swamiji's book, Raja Yoga, contains a translation. The beginning chapters, about 8 chapters I think, I forget the exact number, but around 8 chapters, are a discussion of the teachings of Raja Yoga. And then the second half of the book are the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, so included under Raja Yoga. So now, you find that that has generally been accepted, that when people speak of Raja Yoga, in other Hindu traditions, not just ours, when they speak of Raja Yoga, they are including Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. They include that as Raja Yoga also. So Raja Yoga, I recently spoke on the finding our way through the forest of the four yogas, and in that I described how the dynamic between the four yogas. There are two pairs of yogas. There's Jnana and Bhakti, or path of knowledge and the path of devotion. And then there's Raja Yoga and Karma Yoga, the path of meditation or mental control and the path of action. These fall into two pairs because, as I explained in the other lecture, for those of you who heard it, Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, the paths of knowledge and devotion, are concerned with the nature of reality. If you follow Bhakti Yoga, it's because you're in search of God, the personal God, whom you can love, whom you can devote yourself to. If you're a follower of Jnana Yoga, then you're in search of impersonal reality. You want to know what is real, what is ultimate, what is the ultimate truth, what is that by knowing which everything here becomes known. Kasminu bhagavo vijñāte sarvamidam vijñātam bhavatiti, as it says in the Mundaka Upanishad. What is that one thing by knowing which everything here becomes known? You're in search of who am I? So you're not in search of a person, the beloved. You're not in search of the repository of infinite divine qualities, Ishvara, God. You're in search of impersonal truth. So in Jnana Yoga, you're in search of the impersonal, and Bhakti Yoga, you're in search of the personal. And so they diverge in that way. They can be combined, but isolated. They are seeking a particular idea of reality. Whereas Raja Yoga and Karma Yoga, the path of mental control and the path of action, they don't care how you think of reality. You can be in search of God as person to whom you can devote yourself and to whom you can offer your love and who receives and gives back infinite love, or you can seek impersonal principle. It doesn't matter, because Karma Yoga is a way of using work to liberate yourself. Seek the impersonal, seek the personal, doesn't matter at all to Karma Yoga. Same with Raja Yoga. Seek the impersonal or seek the personal, it doesn't matter at all. It's a technique. It's a path which emphasizes technique. So Bhakti and Jnana, devotion and knowledge, they have techniques also. But all of those two paths, everything in those two paths is oriented towards a particular ideal, a personal ideal or an impersonal ideal. And so Raja Yoga and Karma Yoga are technique oriented. You can seek any type of ideal, any god or goddess, any idea of deity or the impersonal reality. It doesn't matter, but these are techniques. And so that's what makes them particularly universal, because they can be followed by anyone in any path. So now, another thing about Raja Yoga. So Raja Yoga is technique oriented. Another thing about Raja Yoga is that, as I explained in the other talk on the four yogas, that there are four fields of experience that each of us has. We experience the external world. This is one field of experience. We open our eyes, we open our ears, we wake up from sleep, and the external world is here. So this is one field of experience. Another field of experience is my internal world. Who am I? My feelings, my perceptions, my ideas, my conceptions, my imaginations, etc. My internal world. So the external world and the world of the self, the sense of selfhood, and then there's the realm of value. What is the highest? What is of value? And the fourth is the mind, which is the instrument of experience itself. How do I know the external world? It's through the mind. How do I know the internal world? It's the sense of self. It's through the mind. How do I know value and reality? It's through the mind. And so these are the four: the external world, the internal world, or the sense of self, that is, the sense of value or reality, and the mind, which is the instrument of experience. So each of the four yogas pertains to one of these fields in particular. Karma yoga is the yoga which engages us with the external world, a way to find freedom by engagement with the world. Bhakti yoga is the yoga which seeks the highest value, the highest reality, which is God. Who is the supreme being? Who is the repository of all infinitely blessed qualities? That's God. And so let me seek God. The ocean of love, the ocean of blessedness, the ocean of divinity, the ocean of reality. Let me seek God as a person. Jnana yoga seeks the self. Who am I? Who am I? This sense of self that I have, what is it? Who am I? So that's Jnana yoga. But Raja yoga deals with the mind itself, to perfect the mind itself. And so each of the yogas pertains to a particular field of experience, and Raja yoga is the field of the mind. Now Swami Vivekananda gave great importance to Raja yoga. Great importance. I have to say, it's not a criticism, it's just an admission, because of the way our order has developed and the attention we've given to other things, is that Raja yoga, by the order at large, has been somewhat ignored. Now Swamiji gave great attention to Raja yoga, not because everyone should follow Raja yoga, but because he thought that it was a very critically important part of the spiritual picture. I say that the order has somewhat ignored it. There have been books published on other books besides Swamiji's, on the Yoga Sutras and so forth. But you find that much of the attention of the order has gone to Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. And then there have been some great Swamis who are great jnanis as well. But Raja Yoga has not been given as much attention. But in time, I think that will balance itself out, that Raja Yoga also will become important in the work of the order, because it was very important to Swamiji. If you look at the lectures that he gave when he was in the West in particular, in India he was concerned with the development of the nation, the uplift of the nation, the revival of the nation, the people, the uplift of the poor, etc., the uplift of women, etc. But when he was in the West, you find that of his talks, he gave a great deal of attention to Raja Yoga. He gave many classes on breathing exercises, many classes on control of the mind, meditation techniques, and of course he had his book on Raja Yoga as well. So he gave great importance to Raja Yoga. And one of the things he did for it, in everything Swamiji did, he contributed something. He didn't just repeat the past. As I have said on other occasions, Swamiji's ideas are founded in the tradition, but it wasn't just a repetition. He found that one of the weaknesses that had come over Indian civilization, it wasn't a weakness of the civilization, it was a weakness which had come over the civilization after years of domination, was that it had become repetitive. That people were content to repeat what the great ancestors had done and not to think for themselves. You find that over and over again in Swamiji's words when he's addressing the people of India, that they had to come out of that repetitive state, because you find that Indian civilization was extraordinarily creative, wonderfully creative. But then a time came where India became self-protective, and when you're self-protective, you repeat over and over again what you're trying to protect. And so now he felt it was a time for India to become dynamic again. There was not the need for it to be self-protective, but to become dynamic. And so he contributed to Raja Yoga. He didn't just repeat the old, he accepted the old, and he promoted the old, but he gave new emphasis. And so one thing, of course, was bringing together Raja Yoga and Patanjali Yoga. Another thing was to give all of it a Vedantic basis. Another thing that he did was his idea of the expansion of the yogas. Each of the yogas is a field not just for spiritual endeavor. Yes, that we as spiritual aspirants, that's our primary interest. But he saw Raja Yoga not just as the preserve of yogis who are seeking to realize the Purusha, to realize Kaivalya, liberation. He saw yoga as Raja Yoga as the science of psychology, the science of psychology. In the West, modern psychology was primarily developed in its early phases, and for many decades it was primarily developed as clinical psychology. That is, Freud and others, before Freud and after Freud, were primarily looking at people who had mental problems, were suffering mentally. And it was a medical analysis trying to make people what was considered normal, happy, and well-adjusted so that they could be functioning members of society. So psychology was largely directed towards that, towards people who were suffering mentally, making them normally happy. Nobody is always extraordinarily happy, unless that itself is a mental derangement. but making people normally happy, well-adjusted so that they can function in society. There have been psychologists in the 20th century, especially from in the second half of the 20th century, not exclusively, but especially in the second half, who began to develop higher ideas of psychology. That yes, we have to have medical psychology, which is for clinical psychology, for people who are suffering. That's important, very important. But that's not enough to understand the workings of the mind. We have to have an understanding of the potential of the mind, the potentialities of the mind, the creative aspects of the mind, to see what is the highest development of the mind. And so that's primarily what the Yoga Darshana was about. And so Swamiji presented yoga as the science of psychology. Yoga is concerned with all levels of the mind and with all possibilities of the mind. So that was one of his great contributions to the field, one amongst several. And he also presented yoga, that is Raja Yoga. When I say just yoga today, I don't hold me to this always in other talks, but today when I say just yoga, I'm talking about Raja Yoga. When Swamiji designed the emblem of the order, he has the lotus for Bhakti Yoga, he has the sun behind for Jnana Yoga, knowledge, he has the wavy waters for karma, the path of action. Why? Because the realm of action is the realm of action and reaction. There were always waves of activity, action and reaction. So that's karma yoga. And then the swan for the vision of the self, the supreme self, the Paramatman. But it's all encircled by the serpent. One of the things I found when I was working on Swamiji's complete works, and I only found it late in the project I was working on in India recently, towards the end of my work there, just this past fall, a Swami, a friend of mine, who's the head of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, he told me that Swami Mumukshanandaji, who was the head of the training center many years ago, he used to teach us, the Swami was telling me, that Swami Mumukshanji, when he would teach us about the emblem of the order, he would say that the meaning of the emblem as given by Swamiji is that when you have jnana, bhakti, and karma united by yoga, then the vision of the self is attained. But the Swami told me, but I've looked in the complete works, and in the complete works it doesn't say that. It just says by the union of karma, bhakti, jnana, and yoga, the vision of the self is attained. Why is that? So I went and looked at a place where Swamiji gave the meaning of the emblem in the original Bengali. And there he says what the Swami said from Swami Mumukshananda, that when when the knowledge and devotion and action are united with the power, united by the power of yoga, then the vision of the self is attained. And so Swamiji gave yoga, or presented yoga, as the psychological element included in all of the yogas. That yoga is the psychological element of all of the yogas. Where do we practice karma yoga? We think of karma yoga as a path of action. Karma yoga is not in the external world. Karma yoga, like the other yogas, is an internal yoga. Karma yoga is how I deal with my mind when I'm acting. Karma yoga is not out there somewhere. Karma yoga is in here. So all of the yogas are internal. And so yoga is the science of that internal dynamics of all of the yogas. So Swamiji presented Raja Yoga as the science of psychology, and he also presented it as the internal dynamic of all of the yogas. So it's a support to all of the yogas. So it's a difficult path, as Swamiji himself says. Raja Yoga is difficult for several reasons. But in spite of it being difficult, he gave unprecedented emphasis to it. It's difficult. Why? One reason is that you're using the mind to control the mind. And what is more intangible than the mind? You can't get your hand on it. You can't get a grasp on it. So how do you control the mind with the mind? As I've said on occasion, many people over the decades have come to me saying, Swami, how do I control the mind? How do I just tell it to shut up? I can't make my mind shut up. And so, yes, how do I make my mind shut up? It won't shut up. It just goes on chattering, goes on chattering. I try to sit for meditation, it goes on chattering. So Raja Yoga is difficult. But as the tradition says, and as Swamiji says, just as water dropping drop by drop on a stone gradually wears the stone away, so meditation, by practicing over and over and over again, gradually the mind gives way. There's no other secret to yoga, to control of the mind, than steady, regular practice. Without frustration at all of your failures, without frustration at years of times when you feel like I'm not getting anywhere. I'm just going through this because I'm supposed to go through with it. Keep going through with it. Keep going through with it. There's no way to control the mind except for the steady application of effort. And eventually the mind will give way. So that doesn't mean that if we're in a rut, we can't find some help to stimulate the process and learn more about how to meditate. Yes, we can. But even if you do that, you find that after a while you feel that you're still just sitting at this brick wall, pushing against a brick wall, and it's not going anywhere. Many times in spiritual life, we start out on spiritual life and we take up a practice and a path, and we're going down the path, and at first it seems, wow, this is wonderful, this is what I was always looking for. Then we get to a brick wall, and we go on pushing and pushing and pushing, and it doesn't go anywhere. For several years we're pushing. And then we read about something else, and we think, well, maybe that's what I should be doing. We try that, and then suddenly we feel, oh, now I'm moving right along, I'm moving right along. And after some time, we come to a brick wall, and then we push and push and push, and it's not going anywhere. Try something else. Oh, now this is it. Now I feel so good. Yeah, I finally found what I was looking for. And we come to the same brick wall. And that brick wall we come to every time is in exactly the same place. It's not that the brick wall has moved further in and we're getting further, no. It's just that we're trying something new, and in the beginning the mind says, oh, this is fun, let's do this. And then we get to the same brick wall in the same place. So that brick wall is what we have to work against, and that we work against by steady application. So Raja Yoga is difficult. And Raja Yoga by itself, as just a technique-oriented path, where you're just dealing with the mind, that's also difficult, because most people are not fully technique-oriented. Most of us need some philosophy, most of us need some devotion, need some love, something that attracts the heart, that pulls the heart. Just to do a technique just as a technique, that's hard for most of us. And so Raja Yoga as a solitary yoga, just pure Raja Yoga as just a technique, is difficult. But It can be combined with any or all of the yogas. And as such, it's important to any of the yogas. And so that's why Swamiji gave so much importance to it. Now let me just say a little bit about the path itself as taught by Patanjali. What you all know is the path of Raja Yoga, or Patanjali's Yoga Sutra deals with the Ashtanga Marga, the 8 limbs. Now when you study yoga and you study Buddhism, you find that there's a lot of crossover between Buddhism and yoga. And one of the crossovers is the 8-limbed path. Buddha called the Arya Ashtanga Marga, the Noble Eightfold Path, and Patanjali's Eightfold Path. Now the steps of the Eightfold Path are not the same. They're different steps, though there is some crossover there also, but not much. But there are many connections between yoga and Buddhism, showing that the Buddha, in his search before he attained to enlightenment, he learned many things and learned many techniques and things before he attained enlightenment. And he had learned from yogins many things. And so it's not surprising that he gave great emphasis, or that he used certain concepts that are present there in yoga as well. It used to be thought that yoga had borrowed from Buddhism, but it's more likely that the Buddha had borrowed from yoga traditions, because yoga is a very, very ancient tradition going back to the early Vedic period. So the 8 limbs of yoga, one of my teachers, not my guru, but one of my Upa-Gurus, Swami Bhajananandaji, a great Swami, who's now in Bellarmat. He is one of the trustees of the order. He has always maintained that in the Yoga Sutras you find 2 traditions, that Patanjali combined 2 pre-existing traditions. One was the tradition of Kriya Yoga, and the other was the tradition of the Ashtanga Marga. So the Ashtanga Marga, you all know, it has the yamas, the niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. That is, where the niyamas are the moral disciplines, truthfulness, non-stealing, etc. The niyamas are personal disciplines like cleanliness, contentment, etc. And then asanas, learning to keep the body steady through the practice of asanas. Pranayama, control of the prana through breathing exercises in order to control the mind through the breath. Then pratyahara, learning to withdraw the mind from the senses. Then dharana, concentration. Patanjali defines dhyana, or dharana, concentration, as keeping the mind in one place. Chitta bandhas dharana. The dharana is keeping the mind fixed, desha bandhas, chittasya dharana. The dharana is keeping the mind in one place. And then dhyana, he defines as tatraika tamata, tatraika pratyaya, tatra pratyaya katamta dhyana. So dhyana, meditation, is keeping the mind there with the help of, in one place with the help of dharana, and then keeping the same wave rising in the mind over and over again, the continuous rising of the same wave. That's meditation. That is, where you're thinking of one thing and the mind just stays on that one thing. One wave after another rises of the same thing without break. And then samadhi is where the sense of distinction between self and the object of meditation disappears. Swarupa shunyamiva, arthamakra nirbhasa. That is, that only the object itself shines. Swarupa shunyamiva, and there's no sense of being a separate self. There's just the object of meditation itself. And so these are the 8 limbs of yoga. And all of them are aimed towards what? They're aimed towards perfecting the mind as an instrument. As I said, the mind is the instrument of experience. The mind is the instrument of the experience of the external world. I know the external world through the mind. I know the experience of self through the mind. I know the realm of ultimate value, the realm of God through the mind. And I know the mind through the mind. The mind is the instrument of all experience. And even if I have spiritual experience, short of the very highest, where the mind disappears, Nirvikalpa Samadhi, short of the very highest illumination, all other spiritual experience also takes place through the instrumentality of the mind. So the mind is the instrument of experience. And so it's the 8 limbs of yoga are geared towards perfecting the mind as an instrument of experience. You have the yamas and niyamas, the moral disciplines and the personal disciplines. For what? In order to stabilize the mind. If you have not become a good person, a basically good person, then the mind is going to be unsteady. The mind won't be able to sit in meditation. And so you're told to practice moral disciplines and then personal disciplines, including cleanliness, santosha, or contentment, etc. Because that also gives stability to the mind. If you don't have santosha, if you don't have contentment, yes, I forget the English word. If you don't have contentment, then how can you practice meditation? The mind is always thinking, oh, I wish I had that, I wish I had that, I couldn't get that, I wish I were this, I wish I were that, I wish I weren't me, etc. No, you have to have a deep sense of contentment. Now, the fear of many people in America when they hear the idea of contentment as taught in Raja Yoga and taught in Buddhism as well, is that, well, that sounds like it's just, very status quo. It's worshipping the status quo. You don't want to go forward. You don't want to develop yourselves. You just, everything is okay. Just stay with what you have. No, it doesn't mean that. It means that you are satisfied with what you have. If you need something else, then you get it because you need it. But you don't go on thinking of things that you need just because you can't be happy with where you are and what you have. That wherever you are, whatever you have, that's okay. That yes, if you need something more for your family or for professional reasons or something, then do that. But don't do it out of just the restlessness of the mind. Don't do it out of the restlessness of the mind. And if you can't get what you think it is that you need, then be content also. Be content. Do what you need to do to get the things that you need to lead a normal life. But don't always be upsetting the mind with the feeling that I need the latest, new, and improved this, that, or the other thing. I'm unhappy because I don't have this thing. I'm unhappy because I don't have that thing. Watch your mind. When you want something new, you may need it. It may be good for you and everything. You'll go ahead and get it. But watch the mind and see, when you think that, oh, I want this new thing, I want it. It will make my life better. Then there's a sense of anticipation. Then watch the mind after you get it. It's almost immediate. The mind is, okay, so that's done. Now I'm back to the same old person I was before. That sense that you're thinking that, oh, if I can get that, I'll be happy. That doesn't happen. If it happens for 5 minutes when you get it and you open it, and then you realize, I'm still the same person I was before I got it. And that's the problem. I'm still the same person. So santosha and the other virtues that are practiced in the yamas and niyamas are aimed towards bringing the mind to a point where you can meditate. And then asana also. Originally asana meant just to have a stable position for meditation, and that can be a variety of positions. It doesn't even have to be cross-legged on the floor. Luckily for those of us who are getting older. But it just means learning to be stable as you sit for meditation. So the asanas developed in Hatha Yoga, those are very good. And if somebody wants to learn them, that's good. I just heard recently about chair yoga. For those who can no longer sit on the floor and don't have a very limited mobility, then there's chair yoga. People who are trained to teach you how to make the most flexibility that you are capable of. So that's a very good thing. Those are good. But the purpose of the asana, the main purpose, according to Raja Yoga, is to be able to sit steadily so that you can focus the mind. And pranayama also, the purpose of pranayama is not the attainment of psychic powers and so forth. The purpose of pranayama is to stabilize the mind. And then pratyahara. Pratyahara is a step in the Yoga Sutras which is almost ignored because nobody seems to really know what it is, except that it's withdrawing the mind from the senses, as Patanjali explains it. My own feeling is that Swamiji teaches disciplines for doing that, but most books on Raja Yoga, they just sort of skip over it briefly and say that you need to be able to withdraw the mind from the senses without telling you how to do it. But there are techniques for doing that also. That should not be just a path, something that's skipped over because we don't quite know what to do with it. There are techniques for learning how to make them. Patanjali describes it as, I don't remember that one, but let me look it up because it's illuminating what he says about it. Oh, now where was that? Himsa, Yativeda. Svavishaya samprayoge chitta swarupanukara indriyanam pratyahara. So pratyahara is when the mind withdraws from the objects and stays within itself. When the mind stays within itself. And so there are practices for learning to let the mind just settle down. In fact, that's a very good way for many of us to begin meditation. Whenever we begin meditation, whatever method of meditation we use, is first just to sit and just to think, okay, I'm here. Forget about everything else. I'm not going shopping now. I'm not paying bills now. I'm not worrying about the kids now. I'm not worrying about what's going on at work now. I'm here and I'm now. Let me bring the mind just here. And just with talking to yourself and bringing the mind into the present, into the here and now, that itself is a very good practice. And that's the beginning of pratyahara, just bringing the mind here and now. And there are other things that can help with that, but I won't go into those now because that would take a lot of time. So pratyahara and then dharana, learning to keep the mind on one point. Dharana, concentration, means you put the mind on a particular point, external to you or internal. If you're told to meditate in the heart, if you're told to meditate here, if you're told to meditate on a form in front of you, whatever, the various, even within our own order, various swamis who are gurus teach different methods, but you're always told to put the mind in a place. That is dharana. So you're told to say, let's take something neutral. Not because I'm recommending this, it's just for the ease of explanation. Let's say your ping pong ball. Golf ball has too many irregularities, designed irregularities, regular irregularities, notches in it, but a ping pong ball is just solid and plain. So you're meditating on a ping pong ball. So you put your mind there, and the mind runs away, starts thinking about other things, and you bring the mind back, you put it there. The mind runs away, you bring it back. The mind runs away, you bring it back. That's the practice of dharana, keeping the mind in one place. If you picture a deity within your heart, or a light within your heart, then you picture that and the mind runs away. You bring it back, the mind runs away. You bring it back, the mind runs away. That's dharana, putting the mind again and again in the same place. And dhyana, meditation, is when you put the mind there and suddenly the mind stays. Suddenly the mind stays where you put it. That just happens. After lots of the practice of dharana, suddenly one day you find that the mind just suddenly stays where you put it. And maybe after that you can't do it again for several years. You keep trying, but eventually it comes back. And you put the mind there and it stays. And then you get to where most of the time when you meditate, you put the mind there and the mind just stays there. That's the dhyana. And then samadhi, there are different levels of samadhi, but samadhi is when you put the mind there, it stays, and suddenly everything else stops. In dhyana, you have to make an effort. You put the mind there with concentration, the mind stays, but as long as you keep the effort up, the mind stays there. But it does stay there, and then after some time the mind tires and it falls away. But that's dhyana, as long as it was staying there. But samadhi is when you put the mind there, and it stays, and then suddenly the sense of effort disappears. It becomes a spontaneous state. And the sense of all willing, the effort disappears. That's why Christian theology, mystical theology in Christianity, they call this a grace-infused state. That is, you can't get there by your own efforts. It just happens. And of course, their explanation of it is that it's a grace by which it happens. It doesn't matter how you explain it, but samadhi is when you put the mind on the object of meditation and it just stays without any effort. And that's why you have no control over how long you stay in samadhi. If you get to a state of samadhi, even the lower samadhis, or the higher samadhis, you stay there as long as your karma allows you to, and then it just, because there's no willing in that state, you're just there. Sri Ramakrishna explains it as people sitting in the theater waiting for the curtain to be drawn for the acting to begin. And people are sitting there once in a while looking at the curtain, wondering when it's going to open and talking to their friends and everything, but then suddenly the curtain opens, then everyone's attention is drawn from everywhere else and it's just fixed there. And they're absorbed in the action on the stage. And so that he described as samadhi, where the mind suddenly is fixed. So all of the limbs of, 8 limbs of yoga are aimed towards perfecting the mind as an instrument. Because if the mind is the only instrument of experience that we have, if I know everything through the mind, even God, even spiritual experience through the mind, then let me perfect the mind as an instrument, because then I will get perfect understanding, perfect knowledge. If my mind is not perfected, then everything that I know is distorted. And so there's several analogies given to the meditating mind to help us to understand this. One is given of the calm lake. Swami Vivekananda often used this. You have a calm lake. A lake which is lashed into waves by the wind. You don't get a clear reflection of anything. The sun or the moon at night or the trees standing nearby, nothing is reflected clearly because everything is broken up by the waves. And so when the lake of the mind is active with all sorts of thoughts and desires and impulses and things, imaginations, internal dialogue and all of that, then you don't have a clear reflection of reality. But when the mind becomes perfectly still, then it reflects the truth. Then it reflects the truth as it is, like a clear mountain lake. Sometimes you see in calendars where there'll be a mountain lake for one of the months, and it'll have a perfect reflection of the trees against the bank and the mountain behind. And you can't tell, you can't easily tell which is the reflection and which is the lake. And so like that, when the mind is perfectly still, Ramana Maharshi used to say that he had 2 quotations from the Bible. Both of them come from what Christians call the Old Testament, the Torah, according to the Jewish tradition. His 2 favorite quotations from the whole Bible were in what is called the Torah, the Old Testament. One of them was, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still and know that I am God. That's in one of the Psalms. Be still and know that I am God. That, he said, expresses the whole of spiritual truth. When the mind is still, then you know reality itself. God himself, God herself, the self itself, you know, when the mind is still. So that's one of the reasons for practicing meditation. Another analogy is given, and this is given by Ramanuja, as well as others, but Ramanuja is where I have seen it. Pouring oil from one vessel to another. It makes a steady stream. and silently pours into the other oil. If it's rather thick oil, heavy oil. If you pour water from one vessel to another, it splashes and makes sounds and is turbulent. But if you pour oil, it's just a steady stream. It doesn't break. The stream is steady and it silently falls in, and gradually the other container fills. And so meditation is like that, where this mind is pouring into the object of meditation just as a steady stream, making no sound, just steadily pouring. Another illustration is given by Sri Krishna in the Gita, in the 6th chapter. He says, Yatadipo nivathasto nengate supamasmrita. As a flame in a windless place remains unflickering, such is the upama, the analogy, the simile for meditation. A flame, an unflickering flame in a windless place. The flame is steady like that. So the mind in the deep meditation becomes steady, like an unflickering flame. Now all of these analogies are useful, not because, we think about it and then we go into that state just by thinking about it. No, we may find still meditation is difficult. But if we know that's what we're aiming towards, then it gives us something to aim towards. It gives us something to aim towards. It gives us something for the mind, an image for the mind to realize, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I can't do it yet, but this is what I'm supposed to be doing. A fourth analogy is a modern analogy, but also very useful, and that is the analogy of the magnifying glass. Most of us remember when we were kids, when we first found a magnifying glass. You take it outside and you focus the rays of the sun, and you can set dried leaves on fire, you can set a piece of paper on fire. What are you doing? The same rays of the sun are falling as were falling before, but now suddenly you're able to ignite leaves or paper or other flammable substances. Why? The same rays that were just falling to the earth, now you've concentrated, you've brought them to a focal point. You've made them ekagra, you've made them concentrated, one-pointed. And so the same thing is done in meditation. The rays of the mind are going towards all sorts of objects, going towards all sorts of thoughts. But in meditation, we bring the rays of the mind to one point. Why? Because then the mind has tremendous power. Just as the rays of the sun, when they're focused to a point, they can ignite flammable material. Whereas otherwise they're just falling, and that doesn't happen. And so the rays of the mind, the same rays of the mind that we're always using, which are going in all sorts of different directions, if we can, through repeated practice over a long period of time, if we can gradually begin to bring them into focus, we find that the mind gains great power. It gains great power. And so that also is a reason for, or an image for meditation. So now let me bring it towards conclusion. The reason again for Raja Yoga is to perfect the mind as an instrument of experience, because when the mind is perfectly focused, then the truth is revealed in the mind. Now in the Yoga Sutras it says, and also Vedanta says, and the Yoga Sutras again, the Yoga Darshana is a separate school of philosophy, and Vedanta is a separate school of philosophy, both say that just by concentration of the mind, one doesn't attain to illumination. But by learning the ability to focus the mind, to calm the mind, to still the mind, to bring all of the rays of the mind to one point, then the mind itself is perfected, and then it's easy to see the distinction between consciousness and the mind. So both Vedanta and the Yoga Darshana say that liberation comes through knowledge. Liberation comes through knowledge. Not the instrumentality of liberation is not concentration of the mind. We concentrate the mind in order to make the mind so strong that it's easy to perceive the distinction between consciousness and the mind itself. The mind is that which receives the reflection of the infinite self, the Atman, what in yoga is called the Purusha. That's where the consciousness is reflected. And through the mind, it comes through all aspects of the mind, to the highest part of the mind. It comes through all of the lower aspects of mind and into the body. So that if you touch my body, I know that I've been touched. Why? Because consciousness has been spread through the body, through the nervous system. Consciousness has gone to the externals of the body through the nervous system. And so from that original consciousness, which is separate from the mind, it's identified with the reflection becomes identified with the mind, pours through the mind and then through the nervous system into the physical body, so that the body appears conscious. Vedanta and Sankhya and Yoga, all three give the analogy of an iron ball heated in a fire. It becomes red hot. And you touch a red hot iron ball, what happens? You get burned terribly. But does the heat belong to the iron ball? No. The heat was put into the iron ball. Now those of you who are physicists and scientists, don't go wild with your scientific analysis, because this was not meant to be scientific. It was meant as an analogy, a way for us to understand. The fire was put into the iron ball. The fire was identified with the iron ball. But it's the heat, the energy that was put into the iron ball, which burns us. And so this body and mind appear conscious. But why? Because of the presence of the Atman, or in yogic terms, the presence of the Purusha. And so the purpose of yoga is to realize the consciousness as itself, as is the purpose of Vedanta, to realize consciousness itself. Or, because again, in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali gives the path of devotion as another means to practice yoga. Ishvara pranidhanad va. Va meaning or. Ishvara pranidhanad meaning from the surrender to God. That also is a means to the attainment of samadhi, the surrender to God. And so he teaches that as a method, as well as just the control of mind, without the idea of God. So both are means to attain to samadhi. And so whether one seeks the self, or one seeks the beloved, or one seeks freedom, or one seeks enlightenment, it doesn't matter. Whatever speaks to you, whatever is meaningful to you, take that. Don't bother with what you don't understand or don't like. Many times in spiritual life we think, well, I like everything, but I really don't like that idea. So why don't I like that? Why is it that I have trouble? Forget about it. That's not meant for you. Think about what you do like. And so find what it is that you like, and then yoga is the method of perfecting the mind as an instrument of experience. So, so Swamiji wanted yoga to be a science, and science by nature is expansive. And so that means that, and I'll end with this, that the science of Raja Yoga is not complete. Yes, the basic outlines of the science are complete, and the end goal of the science is complete. But there's still infinite detail to be filled in. Infinite detail to be filled in. Patanjali has described the basic outlines, but great detail is yet to be filled in. As with any science, as Swami Vivekananda always said, that knowledge is infinite, and all knowledge cannot ever be put within the covers of a book, because knowledge is infinite. And so books are there to give outlines, but the knowledge is infinite. I once went to a seminar on Ayurveda. This was back in the 1980s. There was a famous Ayurvedic physician from India who lives here in the United States. He still lives here. But an Ayurvedic physician who had been a very important Ayurvedic physician in India. He'd been head of a big Ayurvedic hospital. A very good man, a very knowledgeable man. And now he teaches Ayurveda here in this country. I went to his seminar, and the seminar was wonderful. He was very good at explaining Ayurveda, the principles of Ayurveda and everything. But the one thing I found wrong in what he said, and so that's what I'm going to tell now. A woman asked him, "Sir, is there any experimentation going on with Ayurveda now? Are they trying to find new treatments and new uses for Ayurveda and so forth? And then an Ayurvedic doctor said, ma'am, Ayurveda is a perfected science. There's nothing to be added to it. It was perfected thousands of years ago. All you do is you read the old books and learn the perfected system which was perfected ages ago. There's nothing new to be learned. That is why Swamiji said once, when he was back in India after his first trip and he was ill, his brother disciples told him to take Kaviraj medicine, that is Ayurvedic medicine. And Swamiji told his disciple Shabachandra that I would rather die at the hands of a scientific doctor than be cured by someone who only refers to old books. Now people have taken that to mean that Swamiji didn't like Ayurveda. No, Swamiji did. He had great appreciation for Ayurveda. And if you read Raja Yoga, he never mentions Ayurveda, but he mentions many great things about the discoveries of the Ayurvedic physicians. But what he loved about them was that they were seeking knowledge. And what he didn't like about what had become of Ayurveda was that it was just a dead body of knowledge contained in books. You read the books and then you look at the books and you just do what you do. No, that's not science. That's the death of science. When you think that everything that's to be known has already been known. He found that in all different fields in India, and he wanted to remove that idea that the ancients, they thought whatever thoughts were to be thought, there's nothing left to think. So just go on repeating old books and then there's nothing else to do. No. That the knowledge is infinite. And the ancient books are great. Their discoveries are great. But those should be the foundation for further development, for further research, further inquiry. That is true of all fields of knowledge. That doesn't mean to take on the Western fascination with everything that's new. That something is fascinating just because it's new, and so everything has to be new and everything has to be improved. No, not that. But it's the seeking for knowledge, the seeking for understanding. And that comes by the recognition that knowledge is infinite, wisdom is infinite. And so let me go to the source and try to understand the depths of things, and not just go on repeating what the old books have said. That's why Swamiji said that each of you is to be a rishi. The sooner you believe this, the better for India, the better for the world. That the rishis of old were great, but they are dead. Dead as doornails. Swamiji used that English expression, dead as doornails. Nowadays, nobody, even Americans and English people, don't know what a doornail is. But dead as a doornail. The doornails were still around when I was a kid in some old houses, but not anymore. So Swamiji used that expression, dead as doornails. You must be rishis yourselves. And the sooner you do that, the sooner the good will come to India and good will come to the world. So Raja Yoga is a great science, and one that is of value to all of us, and value even to those who are not on the spiritual path. Because as Swamiji said, all knowledge comes through concentration. All knowledge comes through concentration. So Raja Yoga takes up that idea and develops it to its ultimate conclusion. So let me see if there's one or two questions. Yes. Okay. We'll start with you, Peg, because the microphone is right there. Right behind you, it's coming.
Thank you. Yes, Swamiji, there's so many chemical effects that distract from everything that's ideal in Raja Yoga. I mean, the drugs, prescribed, unprescribed, illegal, whatever, the environment, pollution of the environment, even what we eat can distract us. You drink too much coffee, you can't meditate well. So are you saying that Raja Yoga would overcome those influences?
That's a good question. Eventually, yes, it will overcome those influences. In the beginning, then we have to be careful of influences, because we are, when the mind is not yet strong, very strong, then we are subject to influences. And so we have to be careful about influences, environmental influences and others, as we can. And within the limitations, for instance, if I say that everybody should eat only organic food, many people don't have the money to buy organic food. If you buy it, good. But if that's the qualification for becoming spiritual is that you can only eat organic food, then a whole lot of the world is left out. So that's not a qualification. If you can get it and you can eat it, good. But and so with environmental pollution, we can't do much about that individually. As a society, we have to do something, and individually we can do something through voting and expressing ourselves. But as an individual, I can't go out and clean the environment of all of the chemicals and everything. It's just not possible. So we are careful of the influences that we can be careful of. And for instance, if we need medication, then we have to take medication. And nothing is a bar to spiritual development. Things can affect us, things can slow us down, but nothing is a complete bar to the attainment of meditation. And so we do what we can do as far as the influences in our lives. What we can't, whose prayer was that? The Serenity Prayer, Niebuhr, was it his prayer? A beautiful prayer that's used a lot in the 12-step program, or different 12-step programs, that, oh Lord, give me, help me to, may I have the strength to fix the things, may I have the courage to change the things that I can change, to accept the things that I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the distinction between the two. And so that's good advice for all of us, all of the time. The things that I can fix, let me fix them. Things I can't fix, let me endure them. And in the midst of all of that, let me keep my rudder going straight ahead. Because eventually nothing is a bar to the attainment of the highest truth. Some things are propitious, make things happen quicker, some things make things happen slower. But if I keep my rudder straight, then that's what's going to take me forward. And nothing can eventually, because the truth of my being is spiritual, and so eventually nothing can hold me back. It can only slow me down somewhat, and that I will bear with. Okay, Sanchali, here is another question.
Maharaj, this is not quite related to Raja Yoga. You mentioned a grace-infused state through biblical practices. So, grace-infused state.
Grace-infused state, yes.
Yes. So my question is, so there is a concept of samadhi through biblical practices as well?
Yes. They don't call it samadhi, but certainly Christian mystics, Sufi mystics, Jewish mystics, many of them attained to samadhi. They explained it differently. They used different words to describe it, and explained how it comes to be differently. But certainly, wherever you find knowers of the divine, then they have, because human psychology is the same, and we're all different, and yet we share a common humanity. And so I should say that there are elements of human psychology. The basic elements of human psychology are the same. The variations are at the edges, but the structure of human consciousness is the same. And that's why when you study someone like Saint Teresa of Avila, you find a profound analysis of human psychology, of spiritual psychology, of different psychological states that could be used by a person in any tradition. If you study Al-Ghazali, the great Sufi mystic and great intellectual, you find a similar thing, that his analysis of the mind, of the spirit, of spiritual states was very profound and universal. And so with Raja Yoga of Patanjali. You find it especially in Patanjali because he was only interested in structures of consciousness. But the others also have that, and they also were looking at structures of consciousness. And so, yes, that's a universal. So, okay, one more question and then we'll stop.
Pardon me for asking this question, I might have dozed off or something. I didn't get the pinpoint of tantric expression of this Raja Yoga.
Okay. Yes, and the Tantras, the term Raja Yoga comes from the Tantras. They call that aspect of yoga being the whole field of spiritual endeavor, they call Raja Yoga the path of exclusive meditation, where it's just using the mind to control the mind. So in much of Tantra, there are all sorts of rituals that you do, all sorts of practices you do. You collect skulls of different animals, including human skulls, and make an altar where you sit for meditation, and you plant a betel tree and the other trees, and so many things that you do in Tantra. But Raja Yoga in Tantra is the path just of meditation. You don't have to, no ritual is needed, no mythology is needed, nothing else is needed, but just the control of the mind by the mind. So Swami Vivekananda combined, because the two ideas are naturally harmonious. So Swamiji just combined them. The Raja Yoga, as described in the Tantra, and Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he just called the whole thing Raja Yoga, the science of the mind, the royal science being the science of the mind. Okay, so we'll stop here, and let me give a closing chant, and then I will give the announcements. I'm making a change from usual. I usually give announcements and then the closing chant, but I'm doing it the other way from now on because of the needs of the video. We're uploading, or we're live streaming video of the lectures and the Gita classes. And it's very distracting for video watchers, and when they're uploaded later also, to have the lecture and then announcements which have no meaning to anybody that is looking on YouTube, and then the closing chant. And so from now on I will give the opening chant, the lecture, the closing chant, so that's self-contained. That's for live streaming, that's for uploading, and then the announcements which are not for that. So Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apash Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens, peace is in the sky, peace is on earth, peace is in the waters, peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth.